I think by way of getting started, I would definitely like to kind of hear what your background is. You know, what sort of brought you to the profession that you're in, and then also the specific discipline that you've focused on. I had the opportunity to read a lot of your articles, so I'm excited to kind of dive into that piece of it, but I would love to hear a little bit about your background.
And you're very generous to do that background work. You would be surprised, or maybe not surprised, the number of people who want to have a conversation like this but don't want to do any work before, just want me to build it for them from the ground up. So good for you.
Although I'm a millennial, I'm not an entitled millennial, so I don't assume that, you know, I'm just going to get all this nuggets of good truth without having, you know, a good guided conversation. So I appreciate that.
How old a fellow are you?
I was born in '93, so I just turned 26.
Yeah, you're going to be in that age group. One thing that I'll do in my program is point out that all of these age lines are really fuzzy. And if I were more sophisticated, I have a graph that has all the years and the birth rate and has lines to show when one generation starts and one ends. What I really wish I was sophisticated enough to do would be to have the middle of the generation a very distinct color like blue, and then the next one be a very distinct color like yellow, and then those two kind of blend together to point out that folks in the middle of the group tend to have a lot more of the traits, but the people on the edges tend to blend those kind of traits. And really, what I want to do is I use the generations to give people a new language to look at their interactions with other folks. It's really like intercultural anthropology. You know, if you go to Japan, we know what that culture is like in terms of things like individualist or collectivist and high and low power distance, high and low uncertainty avoidance. We know what the culture's like. We don't know what every person in that culture is like. But if you have these ideas, at least you have a starting place and a language to understand and work with them. So I'm really more about the language than about stereotyping generations. Even though the generational traits that I describe are based on data, and they're based on modal data, the typical or most frequently occurring traits for these generational cohorts. And it's real clear that the people who grew up in the Depression and World War II are real different than the people of my generation, the baby boom generation, who grew up in the 60s and 70s. Real different than those Gen Xers who came up in the 70s and 80s, and real different than y'all who came up in a much more digital, postmodern age.
Yeah.
So I talk about these groups. I help people kind of self-diagnose and better understand the people that are around them. Different groups tend to respond differently to different kind of leadership behaviors. For example, few millennials that I call Generation Next, because the initial press on millennials was so wrong, I changed the name for my research. One of y'all's biggest complaints about the workplace is that you don't get enough strokes from the boss, which is really a good form of leadership. Tell people what they're doing right so they do more of it. You're often supervised by Gen Xers who believe I should not have to talk to them at all unless I'm correcting them. And if I don't have something to correct, I don't need to talk to them at all. So there's some real mismatches like that. Young people, young workers, really like praise from the boss. They want to hear when they're doing well and that they're doing well. And some even want to be praised for just meeting basic expectations, like, good showing up today, Bob. Glad to see you here today, Bob. If you say that to an Xer, if you say to a Gen Xer, I really like the way that you saw that project all the way through, it'll make them suspicious.
Yeah, they'll wonder if you're sarcastic.
Where are you going?
You buttered me up.
Where are you going with this? Yeah, there you go. There you go. So there are some generationally specific tools like that I share with people. The way I got into it is I am an old academic and an old psychotherapist. I started college back in the 70s and really did not leave the academic world. I left for a total of 3 years to work in a therapy environment, and then went back and got my doctorate and have stayed in the field ever since. And so when I taught college, I taught the social sciences, I taught sociology and social work and social research methods. And I would like to say that I learned a lot about social research methods in my master's and doctoral program. In fact, I learned a lot about teaching those methods because the best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else. So if you teach social research for 8 or 10 semesters, you're going to understand that pretty well. You're going to get it pretty well. So I have a very research-minded perspective. So I taught college. I believe everyone should make one bad career move. So I left the college, a tenured professor position, and took a job as an administrator in a hospital.
Wow.
It was in the 90s, and there was a funny time when it was when Gen Xers were coming in, and the Gen Xers did not want to take direction from the MBAs. The clinicians did not want to take directions from the business people. Who are you to tell me what to do? You don't understand my work. So they hired some clinicians like me to come in and be the boss of these other clinicians. And that model worked terribly. My people, my therapy people, we don't understand business models. We don't understand finance. We are terrible middle managers because whenever there's a choice to be made, and on one side is finance and profit, and on the other side is our workers and our patients, we are going to swing to the patients and our team every single time. So that didn't last very long.
It's probably tough to find a compromise between those two as well.
I don't know how people do it.
Yeah.
You kind of pick. It's almost like politics today. You pick one horse and you're right.
Yes.
But that is, the classic problem of middle management is top down is saying save money, be leaner and meaner, and the bottom up is saying you got to take care of us. What can you do for us? So anyway, I left that hospital job and I got into student services administration, managing counseling and disabilities, careers, all of those student services at a college. I'd always presented at conferences on things like stress management and crisis management, and I worked for several times with a financial aid group, and one of them came to me and said, what is up with today's students? We need a program on understanding these students. So I did all the research on the millennials, and they described that group as hardworking, conventional, conforming, academically interested and achieving, and looking to adults for guidance and supervision. I thought, I don't think this is who they were young at the time. I said, I don't think this is who the college is. That's not who I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my peers. That's not who they're seeing. So I did a lot of other research. I'm especially indebted to the Higher Education Research Institute out of UCLA, who's been gathering data on entering college students for 50 years. And so I identified these trends like entitlement, consumerism, the overrating of skills, the underrating of effort required to be successful, the expectation of rewards with little effort, the trophy, the participation trophy developmental model.
Put away the red pen.
I presented to that group. It's all away the red pen because we don't want to hurt their feelings.
Exactly.
And kind of in summary, it is a developmental model that was so protective, it removed all of these developmental opportunities. The red pen tells you need to do something differently. And one thing I'll talk about in the program is I'm a baby boomer. If I mowed the yard, my dad would not have said, good job. He would have said, you missed a spot.
Right.
Because you can always do better. And as soon as you believe you're okay, you quit trying. So you give a kid a trophy for showing up at the first day of soccer. Where's the motivation to try? So I started writing articles about that in 2004, presented at a big conference in 2004, wrote a paper to support it. In 2005, I was asked to do 40 events at schools and conferences while I still had a full-time job.
Wow.
So in January of 2006, yeah, it was pretty insane.
There goes your weekends.
But well, there goes all your leave. There goes all my leave time. You know, if I'm going somewhere else to get a check, I can't be paid by the university and get a check from somebody else. So it was a really interesting year. The times that I would leave work at 4:30 or 5, get on a plane in Little Rock, Arkansas, which flies direct to almost nowhere.
Right.
Be it an event the next day. The number of times I got on a flight in Minneapolis that landed in Little Rock at 11:59 p.m. and then be back in the office the next day.
Oh my gosh.
Do that 40 times. Do that 40 times in the year. So in January of 2006, I had to either tell these schools I can't come see you, or I had to tell the university I can't come back. And so I told the university I can't come back, and this is all I've done since then. And it started with understanding this generation. Then it rolled into best practices in teaching and learning and best practices in service. And this workshop, this program I'm doing for QAD is not about teaching and learning, but university instruction is the craziest profession ever. It's the only profession where people are trained as research scientists or nurses or engineers or accountants or psychotherapists, and somebody says, wow, you're a great scientist, you're a great chemist, now go be a teacher. It's a whole different skill set.
Yeah.
You're an accountant. Now go be a teacher. It's a whole different skill set than accounting. We're not really going to tell you how to do it. Just knock yourself out. And so they go in and do what people have always done, the lecture model, which is an instructional model that predates the written word.
Yeah, the sage on the stage model, as you called it.
Exactly. And so for me, it's what we call in the South a bird nest on the ground. Very easy pickings, because faculty want students to learn. They love their disciplines. They're doing the best they know how to do. And all I have to do is convince them that there is a better way to help students reach the learning outcomes that you care about. Convince them that there is a better way. Show them what that way is and give them a path to develop those skills, and they'll do it. And that's what I've been doing since '06. As I did more research on this generation, I'm an old psychotherapist, and I'm so old that we actually trained as analysts. That whole importance of early childhood experiences, it's always the mom's fault, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I started looking at these kids from that perspective. Somebody had to raise them like this for them to be like this. And the big question became, why did my generation change the parenting model to create this generation of young people? And that's when I got into backing into the generations. And now I do as many business programs on the multi-generational workplace as I do school programs on understanding and teaching today's learners. So that's how it all came about.
So did that come from your kind of pivot into the business world? Did that just come mostly because the generation that you were studying was kind of exiting more and more so the college years into the workplace, and you had a whole wealth of knowledge that you've been building over those 13 years, 14 years to offer?
Well, that's a good question. I got into it because those young people were coming to college. I think a lot of those age numbers are kind of skewed. Howe and Strauss, who were the grandfathers of this, said that millennials start in about 1980. That would make them up to like almost 40 years old now.
Yeah.
And really, in my experience, today, people in their 30s look more like Gen Xers than they look like Gen Nexters. And really the diagnostic line is a Gen Xer was raised in a very busy family where everybody had to really struggle and do their part to keep up. It was both parents working as a new thing. The structures were not really in place to supervise kids between school, into school and into work. The social systems just were not set up for that two-working family. So the Xers really had to struggle to keep up with busy families. When a Gen Nexter probably felt like the center of their family. They were not a critical player in keeping this family machine working. The family machine worked on their behalf. So people who are anywhere near that line, I offer them that diagnostic. If you felt like you had to struggle to keep up with a busy family, you're probably more like an Xer. If you felt like the family was there to serve you, then you're going to be more like a Nexter.
That probably speaks to that article you wrote, Helicopters, Snowplows, and Bulldozers, managing those parents that are just coming in, and they're going to do it for the child, no matter what situation they're in.
Right. And, as I said before, deny the child developmental opportunities of their own. So parents working out for kids, what kids are better off to work out on their own.
Yeah.
And that started, I do a lot of work with the K-12 schools, that started with the K-12 schools. K-12 asked parents into the classroom. And then so then they monitor them into and through college. When I was working on a college campus, we had to adopt a policy that was one tuition, one seat, because it was especially prominent in summer school. Parents wanted to come to class with their kids to take notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a helicopter right there. And
how are they supposed to help them with the homework?
But really, how am I supposed to do that homework?
Yeah, exactly.
And Stephen, the stories that I have heard from people as I've been doing these presentations, the faculty person gets a phone call asking about an assignment and get into the phone call and say, "Are you in my class?" "Oh, no, Billy's in your class. I'm just doing some background work for him on this because he's doing something else right now."
Wow.
And I could tell those stories all day long. What's especially interesting to me now, and that I will enjoy laying on your group, is the businesses that are intentionally involving parents in the hiring process and in the retention process.
Wow.
It's a real thing. Well, it's very simple. When earlier generations went to college, the college recruited them, and the parent might say, "Here's how much money you have, but you got to figure all this out." And most people in my generation just kind of told their parents where they were going to go to school. Then schools with Gen Next, schools started recruiting parents and kids. And you see family tours on campuses. And especially for elite students, the college would reach out to the parents almost as much as they reached out to the kid, because they knew if the parent was on board, that's where the kid was more likely to go. Now let's roll that up to the business world, okay? If business is looking for high-achieving graduates, let's say in engineering, let's say accounting, let's say any STEM field, and I hate to admit this, but I have helped schools do this with STEM teachers. Somebody graduates from a teacher education program and can teach high school math. Every school in the world wants them. If one school in particular says, "This was a very good phone interview, why don't you come in tomorrow and feel free to bring your parents if you'd like to do that." And they do. And then when it comes time to pick where they're going to go to work, if mom says, "Well, that charter school sure was sweet," more likely to pick that place.
Wow.
Plus, you get the parents on board with what the expectations of the workplace are, and they're going to back the workplace up when the kid complains about, "Oh my God, they say I have to be there at 8 o'clock every day." So that's a real interesting dynamic that blows a lot of people's minds.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that speaks to kind of the expectations versus like ambiguity of the real world. You know, they're trying to hold their hand because that's what they're accustomed to doing in order to get that high achievement. So you mentioned establishing those expectations clear, early, and often. So even in the interview, having the parents, giving those expectations to the new workforce. That's really interesting, especially coming in, as millennials start coming into the workplace more and more, as professionals, doctors, lawyers. There's too much ambiguity in the real world in decisions. You even mentioned it in your role at the hospital. How do you hold those things in tension, can't be turning to mommy and daddy every time you've got some ambiguous understanding there, you know.
Well, and you asked a real good question about that, the balance between establishing clear expectations and the ambiguity of the world. And that applies. I wrote that about the classroom. Okay. And the reason I wrote it about the classroom is because everyone, college professors included, have what we call the error of familiarity. The error of familiarity. We know it so well, we assume other people do too. So they don't really orient folks very well because they are not accustomed to not knowing this material, not knowing that this is what the expectations are. And so we saw a lot of students have trouble because college teachers did not clearly articulate what the difference between college learning and high school learning is. So that's the first part of it. Then when you get into deep teaching and learning, there is a model called pedagogies of formation, creating complete people like professional programs do. How do you take a normal person and turn them into a physician or a lawyer or a teacher or a therapist or a pastor? Those people, when they take on that entire professional identity, are very different people from each other. Lawyers are different than pastors because of the professional training they've gotten. But here's the line. You have routine context to introduce novel content. You have the stability of a predictable environment as new things come in. You can't change the structure of the environment and expect people to be stable enough to learn new material or do new things. You give them the security of a stable context so you can introduce novel content. So, you know, the workplace is going to be ambiguous. There's going to be a lot of problem solving going on, but there are some things that young workers need to be able to hang their hat on, like this person will help you if you ask. These are the policies by which we address these issues. Meaning, you know, if we're going to buy a new product, you don't just wander out and spend $20,000.
Right.
There is a process. There is a context that you address this new content through. And I would even argue that that is probably what these programs like QAD and the software that your group works with as well, that software offers the predictable context. It all fits into the QAD model.
Right. Yep.
Now, you can plug in automotive, you could plug in high tech, but this is this context.
Wow. Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier too. It gives you kind of a language in order to understand those interactions and be able to provide that clear context in order to, you know, handle that ambiguous decision making or strategic decisions. You know, and it was interesting. You know, I was thinking about when I was in school, I did a 12-week class learning all about Ethiopia before spending 2 weeks in the country. So we spent 12 weeks to learn about a country that we spent 2 weeks in, and the whole premise was how do you appropriately engage a culture And I think it's pretty apparent, a Western American going into an African country, there's a lot of learning that needs to happen. But you walk into a typical business, or anything, and you see a variety of people of different culture, but also different generations. There's a lot less structure or understanding that, hey, these two people come from Ethiopia and America. Like there's that much difference in how they interpret things, how they interpret the world, and how they communicate. So that's a really good point. Developing that context. So how do you coach like an educator or community, like someone in the community, or like a manager in actually implementing that sort of context, especially in the workplace, given the QAD, audience that you're going to be talking to?
Well, that's exactly what I'm going to try to do in 3 hours with you people.
Awesome.
And it is so parallel to doing psychotherapy in that one of the first things you have to do is to help people know themselves. One of the interesting things about you going to Ethiopia is they gave you some prep before you went over there to say, okay, now America is the most individualist culture in the world. The every man for himself model is stronger in America than any place else in the world. You're going to go to Ethiopia. They are more collectivist in Ethiopia, meaning it's not about individual success. It is about the success of your community or your family or your company. If you know that, then you're going to recognize it when you see it. So what I help folks do, and the program's pretty funny, is talk about what the world was like when we were raised and what values that gave us that we're not really aware of because it's just how we are. Fish don't know they're in water because they're in water all the time. As a baby boomer, I may not recognize that I am hyper-social. I want to be around people and talk to people and make friends with people because I was raised as one of those feral, free-range children that had to learn to get along at an early age.
Right.
Xers tend to be a lot more individual, a lot more independent, self-sufficient. There's a great ribbon that says, there's a Gen X ribbon that says, I got this award for living through a meeting that could have been accomplished by email. And so we don't really recognize there are these generational differences. We just think there's something wrong with these other people. And so my goal is to help folks understand there's not anything wrong with these other people. They bring different gifts and skill sets to the workplace. But the differences, Stephen, are so deep. It comes down to what is good in life. Why are we even here at this workplace? And boomers are often at the workplace to be around people and to have a positive impact on the world. Xers are often in the workplace because everybody's got to be somewhere, and this is the best place for me to be right now to support the rest of my life, which is where I get value. I don't really get that much value from being in the workplace. I get value in my life other places, which is why the best reward for a boomer is recognition, give us a plaque, and maybe some money. The best reward for an Xer is time off.
Yeah.
Just make me not do this. So I just really kind of pull back the curtain on what these differences are. And I have had so many people when I revisit a business, they'll say, "Oh my God, you were here 3 years ago," and people are still using that language. They'll say, "Okay, I know you're an Xer and you don't want to come to this meeting, but we got to make sure everybody's on the same page, so come on to the meeting."
Yeah, yeah, I see that for sure. What do you think is the why for the Generation Nexters?
The simple reason, and I mean, I want to go back to something about the ambiguity.
Oh yeah, definitely.
When I was at the hospital, I had a CEO who was a corporate guy, and he became a good friend of mine. And it was almost like an American befriending an Ethiopian. We were just had such different worldviews. And as a therapist and a real holistic kind of person whose professional perspective is helping people figure out what is best for them to do, understanding their own situation well enough that they can come up with what is best for them to do, as opposed to his business model, which is how do we make these business decisions, and we need to make one and move on. We're going to make a choice and move on. And his line, whenever I presented him with what I thought was just a incredibly difficult conundrum, he'd say, "Well, it's probably really not that hard. There are probably 2 different things we could do." And then he would categorize. We could hire this person, or we could not hire this person. And just this reductionist business model that, and that was his. He did that context every time, and he could apply it to whatever content was before us. So that it all applies. How did they get to be like this? There was a book that came out, and that book was called "I'm Okay, You're Okay." And people in 2019 really have a hard time recognizing that feeling good about yourself, the idea that I am not just an evil, sinful little creature and I should be ashamed and self-doubting all the time, that is a relatively modern invention. Before about 65, 68, feeling good about yourself was the sin of pride or ego that good parents drove out of you by any means necessary. Don't think you're that big a deal. You call that yard mowed, you missed a spot. That's how people had always been raised like that. But then "I'm okay, you're okay" came out, which is the epitome of the human potential movement, which is we're supposed to feel good about ourselves. We don't grow. The philosophy was we don't grow through self-criticism. We grow through positivity. And that is a huge philosophical shift. Think about Catholic schools for the entire history of the world. We're going to rap you on the knuckles until you comply.
Yeah.
And so my baby boom generation was on the cusp of that. We had been raised under the old model, but we became adults when this new model was available. So we're the ones who said, I am not going to raise my kids the way I was raised. I am going to raise them in reaction to the way I was raised. I'm not going to be authoritarian. I'm going to ask them what they want to do. I'm not going to hit them. I'm just going to try to help them figure out a better path. I'm not going to ignore them like my parents largely ignored me. I'm going to be more involved in their life. And so we created this new parenting model. One of the stories I tell is, then this happened at a conference for small business people, and a guy comes up and says, I hire these youngsters. They think my business exists to give them a place to go during the day. They think they can come and go as they please. They don't think they ever need to put their telephones down, and they think I'm interested in what they think. He said, they're just like my own kids. And I thought, I'm going to wait and let that light bulb go off. Somebody over there raised their kids just like he raised his kids, and he's complaining about them just like some other employer is going to complain about his kids.
Yeah, it's true.
And when I do this program, people will turn to each other and say, that's right. That is right. And I like to catch one of those people and say, hey, everything I say is right. That is not a special phrase right there. It's all right.
Hey, it's research-based instruction. I don't know what to tell you.
It's data. It's data. And I'll even tell folks, if you disagree with me, that's fine. You'll be wrong. If you disagree with me, show me your data. Don't tell me, well, smoking's fine because my grandmother smoked until she was 92. That's not data.
It's anecdotal. Exactly.
That's anecdotal, exactly.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I think it speaks to kind of harping back to the context that you were talking about as well, and like the stability that somebody feels. You mentioned a lot in selective risk and where they want to take appropriate risk. You mentioned people being okay with face tattoos, right? But I was listening to an interview with the Shopify CEO. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that company, but he was just highlighting the apprehension in today's world, even though it's a mainstream topic in entrepreneurship or home ownership or just traditional things that people would conceive as, okay, how do I mitigate this risk and go after it? Instead, they'll go after risks like, a face tattoo, right? Instead of starting their own business, which one definitely has a better, opportunity to serve humanity and the culture than a freaking face tattoo. So, but it was just interesting.
Yeah.
So how do you help leaders encourage like that appropriate risk, and what advice would you have for on the other side, the millennial, to kind of embrace those other risks and be able to understand what a risk might entail for them, and be able to make an appropriate decision?
Okay. Several dynamics come into play here. One is that, and of course it all goes back to generational. My baby boom generation, the number one thing our parents told us was go outside and play. We're the only generation that our mission statement was go outside and play. When Xers came up, there was much more of a safety orientation. Both parents were working, and so parents gave these kids a lot of really scary messages so they would self-protect. It's a dangerous world out there. When you come home from school, you go in the house, you lock the door, you don't talk to anybody, you don't let anybody in until mom and dad get home. Okay? That safety orientation has continued with these kids. And a lot of that helicopter parenting is overprotective and is a safety mechanism. Somebody sent me a picture out of their paper where they had built this little BMX course for kids to ride their bikes on. And there's a lot of new stuff now, about helping kids learn to take some risks. We have largely sanitized kids' childhoods by removing the traditional risky activities. And kids need, and there's research out there on this, to develop, kids need opportunities to take risks that they identify the limits of, like how fast is too fast, how high is too high for me to climb, how, if I'm going to walk across this tree that's fallen over a creek, what is an appropriate level of risk for me? And people have to learn that on their own. Parents have largely removed those opportunities from kids' lives, not given them the chance to experiment with risk, and taught them to be very, very careful. That is true in the physical world, but what we see now is a lot of that safety around a life plan. Don't take any risks, because if you get off track, you're not going to be successful in the future. So don't take these elective classes in high school that are going to distract you from the classes you need to get that high ACT score. Don't take these electives in college if they're going to distract you from that GPA that you need to get on into that professional program. So risk-taking in general has just gone down. When this generation first came into the workplace, what I heard from employers was they're enthusiastic and they want to run ahead of their own competence.
Wow.
And I heard stories of a client, so many of these, big client calls because something has gone wrong in an order that they have made and is not really happy with the company. And a young person gets that call and decides it's their job to straighten this client out. And next thing you know, the client's talking to the CEO directly and saying this relationship is over. So on the one hand, appropriate risk-taking might need to be talked about, but at the same time, not getting ahead of yourself might also need to be talked about. Yeah. I would suggest, though, that a lot of young people are getting away from a notion of what we would think of as a traditional career or even a traditional job. They may see life as an adult as not a traditional career path, but just, I have to do something to separate enough money from the world for me to be okay, however I define okay. And so they have role models of these 13-year-olds who develop such a big Instagram following, they're millionaires. Or somebody starts something up and sells it, as opposed, and that's kind of a reliance on talent over effort. Ask them why Bill Gates is so rich, and they'll say he got lucky. Why did Steve Jobs, was he so successful? He got lucky. He was in the right place at the right time. So they may take risks in order to get lucky, as opposed to, what my generation always thought of as the nose to the grindstone. You pay these dues over this amount of time.
Yeah.
And so we may see real different views of work. And I'm going to argue that they are becoming more entrepreneurial, but it's going to be hard for companies to leverage that because they think that they will be entrepreneurial because that will give them independence. I think it's going to be hard to communicate that within a corporate environment. And folks are able to do it. Is it Apple that gives people one afternoon every 2 weeks off to pursue an independent project?
It's Google, 20% time. They give 20% of all their time. Yeah, each week they have 20% of their time to develop a new project.
And that is good. That will help leverage that entrepreneurial stuff. But I would argue that a lot of young folks are going to go, why would I create for them? I should, if I'm going to create, it'll be to get me away from them.
Yeah, it's funny. I heard a quote. It's a lot of millennials they're the only generation that'll work 80 hours to avoid a 40-hour a week job. It's funny.
There may be something to that. But I the new magic word now is STEM, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And there are even states, I don't want to say that Arkansas is one of them, even though we are, where there are certain state-supported scholarship programs that you only get those scholarships if you go into a STEM field. We're not going to pay you to be an art historian. We're not even going to pay you to be an artist, to become an artist. We're going to pay you to be a STEM person. And the deep thinkers of the world like myself say it should be STEAM, STEAM, because the arts are where people learn creativity. They're where people learn to think outside of the box and produce the new things. So if we raise these STEM kids and then say, okay, here's 20% of your time to do something creative, they have not really developed those muscles. That may be kind of a problem, a mismatch.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things that I've been seeing a lot recently was layering on different types of skills and becoming, the best in an industry or the best, in a local area at a specific skill that's layered on top of one another. So, for instance, like an engineer, it'd be really tough to be the best in the world as an engineer, but if they layer on some other skill, like, they're a lawyer, or they have some sort of skill in the arts, they're able to find a way to layer that on top. You could be able to break out and create a good career off of that sort of value that you offer. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and that is a good point. And I've not used the word layering, but I do talk about the idea that what Gen X employees want and what Gen Next employees want is a portable, effective career skill set. And it is the dilemma of development for organizations. If you develop people, you layer on those skills and make them more competitive to go somewhere else. But there's not really a plan B. And I did once have an employer tell me it was a department within a great big organization. And he said, if I develop them, they'll leave. So my goal is to keep them stupid. Tell them only as much as they need to know to do this project. Don't let them talk to anybody else. And don't even let them see very well how this project connects to other projects. And 100% of the young people I talk to say, if I figured out that was my boss's plan, I would be gone in a heartbeat. So I argue that when younger employees see that they are continuing to develop, they will stay with the organization. So you might be on the business development side of this company. And you've gone about as far in the business development area as you can go until somebody above you leaves. What might be a good idea would be for the company to move you to another part of the company where you do logistics or where you do development, or I don't even know what the other parts of the company are. Yeah. Then when the person who is over you in this old department leaves, you've got a better skill set to come back in and take their place. And I call them swirling employment patterns, moving folks around to keep developing them and layering their skills. But this whole point of, am I working for me or am I working for you, is a problem. There, we're seeing a huge, because, and this will sound terrible on tape, but we'll see where it goes. Jobs are for people who can't make it on their own. Okay, is kind of the philosophy. Oh, you're working for somebody. Couldn't really make it happen for yourself, like all these young entrepreneurs that we see out in the world. And Stephen, tell me you don't have a little bit of that in you. Tell me you don't have a little bit of that that's saying, oh my God, how can I spin this off? And you don't want to confess that during the podcast. You better edit this part out.
I'll confess it, of course. Of course, I think like that. And
but that's
it's almost. But the key there, and I think you're getting at it, is that you're able to bring that creativity back in, and you're able to feel as though that's going to be appreciated and encouraged,
Right, and we are in a super funky time in terms of worker-company relationships. Think about the traditionals up in Detroit who got out of high school, got a job at a factory, worked there until they reached a certain age, and with union benefits and retirement and Social Security, they were able to live through their golden years. Okay, how all of those social safety nets have been pulled out with the end of unionization, which is, participations in unions are getting lower all the time, and we see a lot more right to work states, meaning real limits on worker organization, but we're moving to an age where a lot of workers are contractors as opposed to regular employees. So that removes a lot of security. You're not going to develop a contractor. You're not going to invest money in the development of a contractor because they're independent. But at the same time, it does leverage that independence and entrepreneurial nature. I'm not really working for the man. I'm working for myself. So folks are adjusting to these ideas, but a lot of it is like oil and water. How do you leverage creativity for the company?
We could close out here a little bit, but I have a couple, 3 or 4 questions here that I wanted to ask, just kind of rapid fire, if you're cool with it. The first of which is, what book or resources do you gift, if you gift books, or maybe do you suggest that people come and find, especially in the business world, for managers or millennials, Gen Nexters, to go and learn more about this? Other than, there's a great wealth of articles on your website, taylorprograms.com, but what other resources would you suggest they go check out?
That's a good question, and luckily I'm looking at my bookcase right now because I want to give some authors here. One book that I encourage folks to look at is 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid. And I'm blocking on the author of that, but that is one of the best overviews that describes the parenting model that brought this generation around. And
Tim Elmore?
Tim Elmore, exactly right. Good for you. Yeah, there is. Tim Elmore, 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid. One of the more recent books that I'm encouraging people to look at is Gene Twinge's iGen. There's a lot of debate over what the next generation of workers, young people, are going to be. There appear to be some changes between what I call Gen Next and the teenagers of today. And iGen by Gene Twinge describes who's coming next into the workforce. And there's an article in the Atlantic by her, Gene Twinge, called "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" And it looks like young people coming up who are more competent but less confident. And the workplace, schools are having to adapt to that now. You know, the need for safe places, the fragility of even having to hear words that they don't want to hear. And schools are adjusting to that now, and workplaces are going to have to in the future.
Yeah, wow.
In terms of workplace leadership, I don't endorse any words written down about that. I've seen a whole lot of generational workplace stuff that is anecdotal and way too fluffy.
Yeah, a man of the data. I appreciate that. Definitely.
There you go.
So the next question here, what is the number one challenge you often see specifically in companies that you may consult with when it comes to this general topic? I mean, we touched a couple different topics, but maybe the intergenerational habits or contexts that people are trying to create. What is the number one challenge that you often find with companies?
Number one challenge that companies, businesses report to me is getting employees to buy into company goals. Getting employees to understand that as the company achieves their goals, it will help the employee achieve some of their own goals. And that's becoming more of a challenge as job security at a lot of places rolls back. And I've had people at big companies tell me, why should I be loyal to this company when this company doesn't look very loyal to me? And those contractor arrangements are kind of undermining that. But I do talk to folks in programs about how to make some of that happen, and it often comes down to engaging workers on the mission level of the business. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you have people struggling down around basic physical and safety and security needs, they're not really going to be thinking outside the box or be very committed to a big picture goal. If you can help them feel comfortable around safety and security needs, this is a safe place, belonging and acceptance needs, I'm okay, you're okay, achievement needs, being successful at the work, all of those are a foundation to move into what is this company about? How does this company make the world a better place?
Wow.
And when you engage folks at that level, then they can see how they're doing all of this other stuff helps them and helps the company. And what we're seeing is a lot of young people are coming out of college and taking jobs for less money at places that they see has a mission as opposed to more money where they don't get the mission, like nurses who will take a job at a public health clinic instead of in industry.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So the biggest challenge is aligning worker needs and goals with company needs and goals.
Wow.
Nobody does anything anymore just because it's what you're supposed to do. The traditionals, 90% of what they did was just what you're supposed to do. So we're really having to motivate people in different ways now.
Yeah, making people a hero of their own story there. So, I mean, once they align their mission, you know.
I like that.
Yeah, they align their mission with, with the company, you know, then the company is able to make them a hero of that mission, you know, and be able to leverage their talents for a full company mission. I mean, that's a cool thing.
Yeah, and that is hard, not easy.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, my last question, how can people find you, a man a little bit apprehensive from technology? Maybe social media is not, you know, something that you indulge in, but how can people find you other than taylorprograms.com? I know you're internationally renowned speaker here, so I'm sure they can find a seminar, but what would you suggest is the best way to learn about your work?
Best way to learn about my work is go to my website, and I offer links to different constituencies that I serve, whether you're a workplace or a school, and you can find more information out about my programs. I have kind of a psychotherapy model. I do individual consulting as well as offer these programs. A lot of times people will see me at a program and want to talk about how this specifically impacts them and what they can do, and I develop consulting relationships with those people. I do most of my work is still as a speaker, but I do have consulting available as well.
Great.
And just reach out to me on email, mark@taylorprograms.com, and I'll be glad to visit with everybody.
Great. Very nice. Well, thank you, Dr. Taylor. Definitely appreciate the time. And I know, for one, I definitely took away a lot from this. So I'm hoping that, you know, at least the QADers in a couple weeks here are going to take away a lot. And then whoever listens to this, definitely appreciate the time. Thanks, Dr. Taylor.